Was Frederick Wortham right? Let's find out with these pre-code horror and science fiction comics. Hey comic freaks, and welcome back to Dangerous Comics. I'm your host, Dane Georges, and today we're looking at the best of horror and science fiction comics, number 1. Now this is an anthology edited and collected by Bruce Webster, and it came out November 30th, 1986. And it's noteworthy because it has a really great collection of artists, and it is collected and presented in a really great format. Now, in my research, I really couldn't find if there ever was an issue 2, which is disappointing and sad, but let me know in the comments below if you guys have heard of this series before, and if you're aware of any other issues that ever came out. But it's noteworthy because of the kind of artists he was collecting and the time period. This is pre-comics code horror and sci-fi comics that was originally printed by a variety of publishers and comic titles. It has an amazing cover right off the bat by Basil Wolverton, and that's what grabbed me. I found this book at Chicago Comics, just digging through the bins, and it just stood out to me right away. This is such an arresting cover. This alien design is amazing. I love just his contrast of this kind of cartoony, grotesque alien compared to this beautiful woman. Just this juxtaposition is super powerful, and it just really grabs you and pulls you right in. And so this cover by Basil Wolverton is from Weird Tales of the Future, and it was either from January or February of 1953. And Bruce Webster has done a great job of including a variety of artists and storytellers, and I think this really does cover a great range of genres and storytelling types that you would have found in pre-code comics. Just right off the bat, we have some call-outs here at the bottom. We have Brain Bats from Venus by Basil Wolverton, Colorama by Bob Powell, and then Gave Life to Save Life by Frank Frazetta. Really strong showing of talent. I showed it off earlier, but that back cover is actually an ad by Frank Frazetta. So there's a few of those throughout, but I love how he's packaging it so it looks like a full old comic with kind of ads like that. You'd be pretty lost without this. I think this is really helpful that Bruce included this. He outlines who's in this book and where they originally appeared. It's a little bit of a rough layout, just design-wise. It's kind of hard to read through and see what came from where. I would have liked to see it laid out a little differently so it's a little easier to read, but gives a little context to each of these stories. Another difficult thing is that they're actually not in order to how they appear in the book, so I will call them out as we go. Jumping into the editorial, we have, if you're old enough, in your 40s or older, at the time of this being published, you were one of the lucky ones who could have gone right down to the drugstore or candy shop, plucked them off the racks, and bought as many as you wanted for a dime a throw. If, however, you grew up on the post-seduction of the innocent era, you probably first discovered them for a couple of years before discovering girls. Or perhaps it wasn't until you walked into a comic book convention or a specialty shop that you first encountered them. Yellowing, wrapped in bags, their lurid covers promising thrills that the insides, as often as not, actually delivered. We're talking here about pre-code horror and science fiction comics, of course. Those strange, forbidden, and thrilling relics of comics, funk age. They were gruesome, they were gory, they were warped, they were imaginative, and especially to those raised in the wimpy days of the comics code, they were just about the neatest thing ever printed. Like most things remembered from the past, the idea of horror in science fiction is a highly romanticized one. We tend, after all, to remember the good things from our past and forget the bad. And that goes for these comic books as well. Let's face it, there were plenty of crummy stories done back then, and a lot of pretty awful art as well. Often good art was saddled with a bad story, and vice versa. But not here. This is the horror and sci-fi fiction like you remember it. This is the good stuff, the best stuff. I think that gives some really good context. And I think another thing that is really important to call out is this part at the bottom where he says, as you can see, we've taken great pains to duplicate the color of the original stories as closely as possible, and all 32 interior pages are in full color. Just looking at these, and I'll raise this comic book up a little closer to the camera, but you can just see that there's texture in these colors. These are not just a flat color. These are, they feel more painted or having the texture of the page coming through as old comics would have. So I don't know if there is a little bit of cleanup that they're doing here, but overall, this looks amazing. This is how comics should be reprinted nowadays. To lead us in, we had this awesome Basil Wolverton cover, and we start off with just an amazing Basil Wolverton story as well. We have the brain bats of Venus. There are some planets on which man should never set foot. 2 Earthmen found that out too late. So this story originally appeared in Mr. Mystery number 7 in September of 1952. And so we start out with these 2 astronauts crashing on the planet Venus. I love that their spacesuits, they're a little bit more like Flash Gordon-y, but they look like they're like just wearing like old school football helmets, like leather football helmets. But we get them crashing, and they're caught in like some Venus fungus, and his co-pilot did not survive the landing, so his neck snapped. And as he's trying to get out, he is instantly confronted with these aliens on the planet. But I love this mixture of this story with the sci-fi and the horror. In another artist's hands, this wouldn't be as evocative, but Basil Wolverton really sells the horror here of these brain bats and just how disgusting they are. So these brain bats like leave these Venus aliens, and they're trying to get on the humans, and they're able to get on his dead co-pilot and actually bring him back to life. So they're kind of like making him a zombie, but using his brain. This is gorgeous. This kind of like gradient, the way they're achieving that, it's really flattering to the art. But yeah, he's confronted with his co-pilot that is taken over by the brain bat. And oh my God, this panel reminds me of a Jack Kirby panel. He would always draw those faces, or those fit a face in a panel and get both eyes in there and like make them a little closer than maybe they should be. But man, that is ominous. And then this next panel where it's all just silhouettes, yellow eyes with that green to yellow background. Ooh, beautiful. My God, I love it. But he is being swarmed by the brain bats, and he is able to get himself behind a closed door where they store the rations. His co-pilot is saying they're going to get to him, and with the help of the brain bat, they're able to get the ship off the ground and heading back to Earth. Our hero, he's surviving on the rations, but he doesn't have any water. He's able to blast a pipe, sending water through the ship, and he's able to get a few drops there, keep him alive. He's then realizing, they're getting closer to Earth, and he's going to have to do something. So he starts to try to like blast at some of these important pipes. He severs a connection, and he makes the ship go down. It crashes, and he's able to get away from the wreckage, and he sees the aliens coming at him with their zombie host. What Basil Wolverton might be best known for is his work on Mad, and specifically this image of Beautiful Girl of the Month reads Mad. This is probably what he's most well known for, so I love being able to see like this kind of style versus what he's doing in a more traditional comic style of the 50s, kind of more Flash Gordon-y. So it ends with he shoots these guys down, he's able to make the ship explode, he's hit in the blast. When your senses begin to clear, you somehow find yourself hoping that some of the brain bats escaped the explosion. I shouldn't have tried to destroy them. I must have been out of my mind. Then comes the realization that you, Rod Crenshaw, died in the blast, and that the thoughts now coursing through your revived brain are those of the brain bat that escaped the blast to make you a zombie. And so, he might have killed some of the brain bats in the blast, but one of them survived and was able to get him. So Earth is not saved yet. Oh, man, just a really cool collection. So, we got that story, and a lot of these comics, they're filling the pages. If they didn't sell an ad, maybe they'd do a splash page illustration. This illustration, Life on Other Worlds, comes from Planet Comics number 50, which was printed September 1947. And this is an illustration by Frank Frazetta. I love just kind of like the turn of this character is in motion. Like they could be very static, but there's a lot of motion in this illustration still. It's a fun like mixture of sci-fi and like actual science. It's Life on Other Worlds. We're getting Uranus. We get like a little write-up about discovered by British astronomer, like a little bit of history, but then also be like science fiction with it. This next story is Colorama by Bob Powell, and it first appeared in Black Cat Mystery in August 1953. And it's doing some really adventurous stuff with color. I mean, it's called Colorama, so it has to do with color. And that is kind of a bold thing to do in a 1953 comic, especially since it really wasn't guaranteed that these were going to print well. But I think it's a testament to how this work is collected because it looks really nice. I feel like they had to have maybe had like a really clean copy of all these books that they were scanning, but it almost feels like they had to have cleaned it up a little bit to make it like, there just isn't as much like overprinting or, off registration color as maybe you would have gotten of comics of that time. To contrast it, there were a lot of comics kind of lost to time, a lot of horror books too. And one of those is This Magazine is Haunted, which is a Charlton comic. This is the Charlton 1954 series. This is volume 3. Here we have some Steve Ditko, who we're going to see later in the other book we're looking at, but you can kind of see how it's still a little bit messier. It still like has more off registration. Like here, the cut is like almost completely out of the letters. It's got amazing colors. You can see, that the book I think we're looking at is being very true to the color choices, but it's definitely getting rid of some of more of this noise. So like things can be like more of a pure black like this. Be very interested to hear like how this book was made. It has the feeling of this book while being a little bit more tight and a little bit of a better presentation. Colorama is a really cool story. This guy's driving, and as he's looking, his eyes start like playing these weird tricks on him. He's seeing like something in the sky. This red is transforming, and it ends up that he passed a red light without stopping, and a blue shape comes up to him, and it's a cop. The cop is saying, "Yeah, giving you a ticket, buddy. You deserve it. Missing that light, you ought to have your eyes examined." He gets his ticket, and then late at night, he goes into this optometrist's office, and of course, this optometrist has these experimental glasses that he wants our guy to try. And he puts them on and, it instantly fixes his eyes. Colors seem to remain still, static, no weird shapes. You want to pay for the glasses, but your optometrist takes them back. No, I'm sorry, the glasses are not for sale, you see. There's still a flaw in them, a flaw which I have yet to resolve. But you can come back tomorrow and we'll carry on our examination. And so he walks out. And as he's walking out, he has another attack as he looks up at this light and he starts spinning, looking up, and he's just getting disoriented as the colors kind of overwhelm him. Next day, he comes back to the optometrist, but the guy still won't give him the glasses, so he has to break in and steal them. But when he steals them, he wears them for too long, and he notices the flaw. And the flaw is that these glasses start to collect all the colors, and they start to become all colors combined, which is black. And he's watching these kids play, and we get a really cool like animated sequence as this girl is bouncing the ball. We get it like a boom, a little farther, hitting the ground and then bouncing back up. We also get this cat kind of moving farther into the panel. Just really cool animated sequence, and I love how we're just pulling more color out until just some reds, and then it's all purple, and then it's all black and white, and then it's just pure black. It says, you realize the glasses could not hold back that one color, black, that one color which has all other colors in it. And so you grope your way through the blackness for days until the effect of the strange glasses finally wear off, and you are able to see again. So really interesting story. It's kind of a short little guy. It's a really fun idea. I think this could be expanded on into a much bigger story or just a much bigger idea of how you tell a story like this in comics, but it is dependent on the coloring, and I'd say it's a really strong element of this story. And I wonder how much Bob Powell had a say in the colors. I think his work is really strong here, and I love how he's going into some abstraction with this. Next, we get a 2-page story from Frank Frazetta. This is Gave Life to Save Lives, and it appeared in Famous Funnies. So it's a story of a man that gave his life for his country, and it's ending asking, Master Sergeant Travis Watkins gave his life for his buddies and for freedom. What can you do? So kind of being a little bit of propaganda, trying to get kids to sign up for the army, to enlist, and also as they call out down here, doing your duty by buying more U.S. saving bonds to defend your country. But, showing his chops for drawing guns and war stories. And now we get this amazing Steve Ditko story of Library of Horror. And this appeared in The Thing 13 from April 1954. And it is presented in such a beautiful manner. These colors are amazing. I'm blown away by this story especially. This is probably my favorite in the book. Going to bring it closer to the camera so you can see some of these textures that we're getting in here. It's like a little bit like a grain in these purples. Love these kind of like turquoise greens. we're getting like a lot more halftone pattern in this story than I'm used to seeing on Ditko's work. This is an awesome story about Ken Rowland, who is a writer, and he's desperate to have a hit. And we get Ken saying, "Good heavens, I've trespassed into the beyond, and there's no escape." Ken Rowland had been slipping for a long time, but this day at the offices of Chilling Mysteries was a day of reckoning. Grim-faced Alan Fargo, executive editor, faced him squarely. And the editor is saying, "Face it, Ken, this is the worst trite I've ever read. What happened to you? What happened to the brilliant writer I developed?" I don't know, Alan. I'm trying, believe me, I am. But I don't seem to have it. And it kind of goes back to the age-old question of, like, where do ideas come from? Where do stories come from? Where do, like, artists and writers get their ideas? And where, like, how do you continually go back to that well for more? And so we have this guy who's kind of, like, washed up. He's like, "I got no more stories. I got nothing else to tell." He says, "Just bring in something realistic, that's all. You're still the best writer I have." He says, "All right, Alan. I'll see what I can do. I've got to do better. I've got to." And so he's home. He's struggling to write. He just like is racking his brain. He's just like not coming up with anything of worth. And I love this shot of him walking down the street. We get a couple like down shots where we get a little bit of rooftop as somebody's like walking through like a congested alley. And I really just love the sense of place that Steve Ditko's giving us. I love these like shingles on the buildings. Get like a little bit of a gargoyle there. And he's coming up on this really cool looking like bookstore. Being in Chicago, I'm always walking around trying to find this bookstore. He's saying, "Hello, I never saw this place before. Wonder what kind of books they sell, and how come it's open so late?" And as Ken walks in, he says, "A horror library, one of the largest I've seen in my entire life. I can't believe it. My luck can't have changed so fast." And the old man is saying, "It will change faster if you decide to become interested in my collection. But of course, there is always a price, and my price is a human soul." And so Ken is kind of like thinking like, this guy's full of it. But he's very creepy. I love that his walking stick has like a shrunken head on it. But he's telling him to look into this back room, and ooh, so cool. This desk has like a face on it, and there's the Book of the Dead is spread open on top. And so he's wanting this book. He's wanting this library. He says, "And they can be yours, but only on my terms. Think of it, the entire library at your command, and what stories you could write, and all would be real. All you need to do is bring me a suitable body here, dead or alive." The bills are piling up. Maybe that old man was up to something. He's like, "I'm desperate. I gotta try it. Why not?" And he goes out and he kills this homeless man. He says, "Die. You'll be doing the first decent thing in your life. You'll be helping me." Ken's obviously a little narcissistic. Takes the body back to the old man at the shop. And with it, he's given access to the Library of Horror. And this is such a cool panel. I love this panel of Ken in the library, and it's like smoke is kind of like entering the room, and Ditko is like overlaying white halftones over it to kind of set some depth and kind of show something like breaking up the black of the ink. It's such a cool look. His head's heavy, so dizzy, and he kind of thinks that he's getting affected by some kind of hallucinogenic smoke in this room or something, and all of a sudden he's seeing these nightmarish images, and what he's initially confronted with looks like it's the homeless man that he killed being terrorized by these demons, and they're going to enjoy their meal. And Ken says, "Wait till Fargo sees the story I'm going to write. This is sensational." Then after this, he's hooked, and he starts to go down his dark, dark path. And with that, he is becoming a murderer so he can get closer to becoming a better writer. And so we get him going out and killing so he can go back into this like nightmare world. And I love that he's traveling around hell or this like nightmare dreamscape with his notepad and pen, just kind of documenting what he sees to bring back into the real world. So book success followed book success, and soon Ken Rowland became famous. Each rapidly filling volume of his library shelf portrayed a world of terror, and he eventually starts rubbing elbows with the rich and famous, and he meets Marion, this singer, and they fall in love. We get this ominous shot of the old man looking over them as they're in their car. After he gets with her, he stops killing, and now he can't write anymore. So he gets desperate. He goes back to the old man. "I'll pay you. I'll do anything but kill again." And he says, "Sorry, but those are my terms, young man. I cannot violate my own agreement." And so a few hours later, Ken has to go back out, and he kills again. And he blindly goes after this woman, just stalks her down and chokes her out. And so he's back into the dream world after that, ready to get his inspiration. And that's when he sees that Marion is the one that's now being tormented by these demons. And he's realizing that that's who he killed. He saves her and kind of brings her back to the real world. These demons aren't able to like affect or attack anyone that's like alive. So he's able to steal her away. But when he does, the old man reveals himself to be this specter of death. He says, "I am death." He has to make a trade now so he can save Marion, his wife, but she's not going to remember any of this, and he will now get pulled into the dream. And as Ken Rollins screamed out his last, the cloak of darkness overwhelmed him to take him back to the beyond. This time, forever. The Thing. Just really, really fun. Definitely, like I said, one of my favorites of the issue, and always so cool to see Steve Ditko kind of stretching and just like how talented of a storyteller he is. And so next we have Mother Ghoul's Nursery Tales. And this first appeared in Mysterious Adventures number 24, March 55. And this art is by Richard Doxey, who is someone I'm not super familiar with. But you can tell that this story is definitely a little bit more inspired by like an EC Mad kind of story. So still some horror, still some sci-fi, but a little bit more of like the kind of cartoony approach of Mad. But we get a nursery tale with a little bit of a little cheeky spin to it. This is Chicken Little, but it's Chick Little. It's just she thinks the sky is falling, kind of like Chicken Little. Nobody really believes her. She kind of goes off to the big city to kind of like warn everybody. So she gets a ride from this wolf, comes and gets her, and he takes her into the city, takes her dancing. Really great cartooning throughout. But she's trying to warn everybody. They think she's crazy, so they take her to the booby hatch there with people that think they're like Napoleon. But then this creepy doctor named Dr. Fraud comes in and tries to heal her. And they're saying, this isn't based on any real doctors, but it's obviously supposed to be like Dr. Freud. He actually ends up kind of like fixing her. And when she is fixed, she then all of a sudden starts making all these connections in her brain and actually becomes intelligent and drives him insane while she goes off on quiz shows and she knows all these things and goes back home. But she gets a little too big for her britches. Now, when the sky actually is falling, she doesn't believe it. And they get scooped up by these aliens. Just a fun, goofy story, but really akin to Mad Magazine style. And we end on Mother's Advice, which appeared in Weird Mysteries number 7 with art by Tony Mortallero. This story is especially interesting because we get little extra info in the editorial in the beginning. Mother's Advice from Gilmore's Weird Mysteries number 7 is famous for its third panel, which was featured prominently in old Fred Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, but it's also a well-written and nicely drawn tongue-in-cheek little story that is a fine example of the EC imitators of the day. And so they're talking about this panel right here. And so the whole thing is that this woman's husband cannot give her the time of day. All he cares about is eating. He's at the beach here with her. She's in her sexy bikini, and all he cares about is eating this sandwich that he's got. What would you do when you're horribly in love with your husband, and he doesn't even notice that you're around? That was Diane Ford's problem. She was crazy about Frank, but he seemed to have lost all interest in her. He paid more attention to the food that he ate than he did to his wife. So Diane did what any girl would do. She sought her mother's advice. Diane couldn't understand it. After all, she was a beautiful girl with plenty to offer. What was the matter with Frank? Diane wasn't just another girl. What had happened to his love? And so, yeah, that's a crazy panel. I could see why Frederick Wortham would pull that one out. But also with the color here, too, you see more of that, like the way the skin tone is, it's more of like a grain rather than like half-tone dots or anything like that. But it's really nice. It adds some more depth to the page. He doesn't give a crap. He's not even looking at her. He's eating. He's like, oh, I'm still hungry. I'm going to go get another sandwich. She's just doesn't know what to do. She calls her mom. Her mom's like, well, put on that nice dress of yours and have him take you out to dinner. And so they go out and he just still is not giving her the time of day. He's like obsessed with the dessert that he's having. She was like trying to call out that this guy in the background is like making a pass at her. And this guy her husband doesn't even care because he's just enjoying his meal so much. And she's like, all right, take me home, Frank. All right, just let me finish this dessert. It's out of this world. They go back home. She's needing more of her mom's advice. And she's like, what should I do? And the mom's like, oh, I have a plan. I'll cook a meal and then you can pretend that you cooked it and we'll serve it to him. And he's got to like that. And so they cook him this big old feast. And oh man, this coloring is really cool. It's like kind of like sickly green, but really kind of separates him from the foreground background. Really cool. And like you could have just colored him normally, but he would have flattened the whole image out. Well, Frank, how was it? Is my daughter a good cook? And he's like, not bad at all. Of course, I've tasted better, but it was all right. And then the mom snaps and she starts to stab the husband, and we get this cool shadow as the wife is like looking on in horror. Diane's like, no, mother, no, don't. And then the final panel reveals that the mom cut out his heart. Well, you wanted my advice, didn't you? And I gave it to you. The only way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Here, take it. And so, yeah, like a little bit of a cliche ending there with a kind of a cliche line, but, you know, great imagery, great drawings. I just, it's so like this. I feel like you could see why maybe people thought that Frederick Wertham was right with some of this comic stuff. And we end on another ad. This is a really interesting ad. It's like blackheads and they get Vacutex and they're freaking hot as heck. I think it just really kind of completes this whole package that you get like ads that like Frank Frazetta did. We end on this one on the back and it's, we can stop the enemies of youth, and the enemy of youth is dope. He's like, if you want to get on the inside with some smart fellows, join up with us. And this boy became addicted to dope, and he had to sell dope to others to get some for himself. He's a dope fiend. We better keep away from him. Sick and desperate, the boy roved from place to place, seeking dope and giving up his true friends and companions. Frank Frazetta was definitely cashing some checks. But yeah, this has been the best of horror and science fiction comics. And I think it's just really complimentary to the art here and the era, the way this is colored and collected. And I would love to see more comics kind of presented like this. If there's other anthologies like this that you know of, let me know in the comments. I'd love to check them out. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this shed some light on some stories and artists that maybe you aren't as familiar with. But if you're a comic freak just like me and you can't get enough, maybe check out some of my comics. I'm a self-published cartoonist, and you can find all my work at DaneGeorges.com. I have series like Doomskull, which is about an ex-supervillain that works at a grocery store with his minion Bag Boy. I have 3 issues of that in print with a 4th on the way. I also have X-Ray, which is a collection of my 4-panel webcomics that I'd post on Instagram, Webtoons, and Tapastic, as well as black and white zines like Jigglybub, which is about a piece of gum that God spits out and lands on Earth, The Passenger, and Sleepless Sights. You can find all this and more on my website, DaneGeorges.com, which will be linked in the description below. But thank you so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. I post a new episode every Wednesday, so you're sure to find something that you like. But until next Wednesday, remember to think and read dangerously.